All right. So hopefully you should see that message pop up. Welcome to the traditional oil and gas theme for September 26th. This is going to be the second part of our energy update. The order that we're going to take things today is we're going to talk about waste management, and with Tara Kinsley Lee from ODNR. We'll be talking about brine wells from Kenny Brown, and we will talking about the public meeting process through both Tara and Kenny are going to go through that. And Mark Bruce is going to go a little bit more in depth with the orphan well program from ODNR. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel to everyone. Tara Kinsey Lee is the primary ODNR contact for the waste management facilities in Ohio. She will talk about the program statewide. And I have Kenny Brown going next. He will be on the panel as well. Kenny Brown is is the underground injection control manager for the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Oil and Gas and Resource Management. He has been with the division for 9 years, has an expertise in overseeing the permitting, construction, operating, and plugging of injection wells for the state of Ohio. He has a Master of Science and a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Bowling Green State University. And the last person I'm going to introduce here, we have Mark Bruce, is an administrative officer at the ODNR Division of Oil and Gas. He manages the public information and the information management sections and coordinates the rulemaking efforts for the division. He's worked at the Ohio Department of Ag, Ohio Oil and Gas Energy Education Program, and is a former TV anchor. So again, those are going to be our panelists for the day. We will go ahead and start with the first presentation from Tara. Tara, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you for joining us. And do you have screen sharing privileges?
I'm not familiar with Zoom, so bear with me.
Okay, should be, there should be a button at the bottom. I think it says share screen.
Yep.
And then you'll be able to show us your presentation if you have one. Otherwise, you could just if you just have a verbal presentation, you can do that as well.
Nope, we've got some PowerPoint slides here. Can you see that? Oh.
Okay. It looks, yes. So yeah, we can see your presentation now.
Okay. Now I just got to. All set?
Okay, I think we're seeing the we're not seeing the presentation version, but
Oh,
you might have to share a different screen. I know it's a bit tricky sometimes. If not, this is
okay.
fine as well. Yeah, so we're seeing what the presenters
Okay.
view.
So, let me. I apologize. I'm trying to get back to the big screen for the the Zoom meeting.
And if you can, it's not a big deal. This is fine too. Just letting you know what we're seeing.
Okay, hang on. I think I've got it. Okay. Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Thank you, Tara.
Sure. Welcome everyone. Again, my name is Tara Lee. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources, Division of Oil and Gas Resources Management. I manage our waste facility program. And today I'm going to talk just a little bit about our program and what the history of it, and then just we have promulgated rules, so I'm going to kind of go through the rules and give an update on those. So to start off with, what is a waste facility? Well, it's basically a location where waste from exploration and production from oil and gas resources is taken for storage, processing, or treatment, and prepared for then final disposal. Our program was established in the Ohio Revised Code back in 2014, and it's under 1509.22B2A. And basically that just states that no person shall store, recycle, treat, process, or dispose of brine in this state or other waste substances associated with exploration, production, development, well stimulation, and production operations or plugging of oil and gas resources without a permit or a chief's order. So since 2014, the program has been operating under chief's orders. So basically we were limited to the requirements that we could list out, special requirements in those chief's orders. And our enforcement capability was fairly much limited to if you were storing, processing, or treating, we could either force you to get a chief's order or suspend operations, or if you were spilling on the ground, we could enforce that, which is covered under another section in the Ohio Revised Code. So we've been working for many years, and we finally were able to promulgate rules, which became effective back in January 13th, on January 13th of this year. And it gave all the existing waste facilities that were operating under a chief's order 6 months to obtain a permit. So that was July 13th of this year. So of those waste facilities that we currently had actively operating, 16 received permits, and 6 then opted to not continue business operations and are proceeding into closure. Okay. Why is it not advanced? Oh, it did advance. Okay. Okay, so some of the main components of the rule are insurance. We do require a $2 million liability coverage for insurance, and then financial insurance is also required, which is basically bonding, certificate of deposit, or letter of credit, and the amount of that bond is a formula based on storage volume at the waste facility. So it varies from waste facility to waste facility and on the amount of storage that they have for of actual solid waste and then of liquid waste. Our rules also include siting criteria. So there are restrictions on where a waste facility may be located. There are floodplain restrictions that they have to abide by. It also needs to be 1,000 feet from a private dwelling or public building, 1,000 feet from 5-year time of travel or emergency management zone of a public drinking water facility, and then 100 feet from wetlands, surface waters, ponds, springs, and private water wells. There are specific permitting requirements that are required depending on where their waste facility is located and what they plan on doing. Drawings must be completed by a professional engineer. And then there's many studies that may or may not be required, again, depending on what type of waste facility they're going to be and where they'll be located. Those can be from a geotechnical report, a dust control plan, stormwater prevention plan, soil and erosion control. So many facets that we can require. We do have a public notice process now that's also included in the rules, and Kenny's going to speak about that a little bit later in more detail, as both our programs, the public notice process is very similar. We also have detailed construction requirements. So during construction, we do provide inspections periodically, and then at the end of construction, we have testing and verification requirements that are to be overseen by the professional engineer and signed off on to ensure that everything is constructed properly. We also have standards for classification of oil and gas waste, which is looking at whether or not it's T-norm, which is technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material. So some of oil and gas waste is T-norm. We look at that information, what the level of the radiological content is of that waste. That all needs to be documented, and lab analysis accompanying that, and that gets attached to manifests. So we know what's coming in and then what's going out for final disposal, both in the state of Ohio and then out of state. We also have operational standards, which helps us make sure that they're operating the waste facilities in accordance with the rules. Some of those are quite simple, from you can't have stormwater accumulated in your secondary containments. You can't have waste matter in your secondary containments. Certain levels for tanks have to be maintained to ensure that overflow doesn't occur during storm events. So it gives us a lot more ability to ensure that the waste facilities are operating properly and not going to cause environmental or public harm. And then we also have reporting requirements now. So there's different things that they're required to report and keep on hand, but we do require them to submit an annual report to the division. And it documents the amount of waste received at the facility and the amount of waste taken for disposal. And that's broken down by the type of waste, and then whether it was in state or out of state. And then we also have enforcement capability now, which gives us more than what was those two items that were outlined in the Ohio Revised Code. So the important part of this is that it gives us that ability to, if we determine that how they're operating a waste facility could be a detriment or harm the public health or the environment, we can have them suspend operations. So that's a nice improvement for us. And then the final item is closure requirements. So once a waste facility does close, it gives us the ability to have them submit various plans to us, including decommissioning of all equipment, so that we know that it has either properly been cleaned and where it's going for it from there, whether it will stay in the oil and gas industry or it will go elsewhere. And then also for remediating the site. So they'll have to do a full site assessment, determine if there was any contamination that could have occurred at the site, and then clean that up and remediate as necessary. So that's all I have to speak on. Here's my contact information, and then a link to where our current rules are. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kenny.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Tara. That was a great update. So we did have some questions, but I just want to remind everyone that what we'll do is we'll go through the presentations, and I see there's already a question in the chat, but we'll get to those at the very end after everyone's presentation. So Tara, if you don't mind sticking around till the end, and then we'll get to those questions.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation, and Kenny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have
Okay, great.
screen sharing capability too? We're still seeing Tara's screen. Oh, no, we're seeing yours. Never mind. Okay.
Okay.
We're all good.
Just want to make sure. Okay. So like Dan said, I'm the underground injection control manager. Our division went through a rulemaking process last year, and we so new rules went into effect in January 13th of this year. Those rules really outlined modification and updating of our permitting process, requiring additional items each applicant would have to supply to the division, really expanding the surface facility requirements to be submitted, and also additional testing that could be done on the site, so geotech work depending upon a site visit. So these wells are, let me step back. So these are class 2 disposal wells that these rules went into effect. So these are injection wells that are taking oil and gas waste for ultimate disposal. They're in the state, we have authority over class 2 disposal and class 2 enhanced recovery, as well as class 3 solution mining. But these rules really are over the disposal wells that most people are familiar with. So going back to the rule changes, so we had additional operational testing requirements, requiring them to test every aspect of the surface facility, which was new. We also have water well sampling within 1,500 feet of the well and the surface facility for private wells. The area review went from a half mile all the way up to 2 miles for unlimited injection. So we expanded that area review, and area review is where the applicant and the division do independent review of every oil and gas and injection well, every artificial penetration in a known radius around the well to ensure that there's no sort of pathway for fluids to migrate through a well bore, either an active well or a plugged well. We also have the increased authority to deny an injection zone geologic formation. There, like I said before, there's enhanced testing and surface facility testing to ensure everything is working the way it should be prior to injection. We went from 300 feet of required cement on the backside of the production casing all the way to 500 feet. So those are additional changes to the wells. A main change to the rule is siting criteria. Prior to this, we had very limited specific siting criteria. A new well could be right on the side of a property, which now it cannot. So new wells have to be at least 500 feet from a property boundary of a subject tract. So if a company has multiple, parcels, that would be considered their subject tract. They have to be 750 feet from a private dwelling or public building, 1,000 feet. So this is very similar to Tara. So 1,000 feet from a 5-year time of travel, 100 feet from wetlands, surface waters, any waters of the state. And then pipelines, if they have to meet certain specific boundaries, but if they want to be closer than that, then they have to have approved safety requirements, including a pipe and a pipe, so double encasement of the pipelines going through these sensitive areas, and those also have to be approved by the chief. There's also additional requirements that we've added quarterly. I don't know why it's just going. So we added quarterly reporting, which was annual. So we're getting more reports from operators. We have additional enforcement actions to shut well owners down if they're if they are overpressure or the additional pollution and contamination issues or any sort of seismic monitoring. So if there's we determine there's a seismic event of a certain threshold of a 1.5 magnitude within 3 miles of the well, we have authority to shut them down. So there's plugging where there's enforcement to require wells to be plugged, which are in our rules, which you can see on the screen. That's in that code. So it's this rule that was updated went from 13 pages to well over 60 pages. It's 150193 is our administrative code. And that was this is my contact information if you have any additional questions on that. And then we'll go into public notice. So The rule went from a 5-day consecutive days in a newspaper of general circulation within the county, and then 15-day comment period. And there was also an urban, if you were in a township of 5,000 or greater population, or in a municipality boundary, then you had an additional 500 feet around the well. You had to notify actual citizens that owned real property. So we went from that notice, which was lacking in modern notification standards. So now we've established, the division's going to post the application on the website. So we're going to go from, so it's going to be on the website. Then there's going to be, for oil and gas well, or for the UIC class 2 disposal wells, we're going to notify every well owner within the area review. So all the way up to 2 miles, every well owner will be notified by direct notification, a letter given to them, and the owner will have to supply an affidavit stating that. Also, every surface owner who owns real property within 1,500 feet from the well or surface facility or waste facility would have to get a notice from both applicants, or from the class 2 disposal applicant and the waste facility applicant. And then there's also notification for county commissioners, township trustees, or municipal, who's the senior municipal authority, so the mayor or county or village would have to be notified depending upon where the well is situated or a waste facility is situated. So you would get direct notification that they're proposing to put a well in, or a waste facility in or around your boundaries. So this is where so this would give you direct notice. Those people who had direct notice would then have the ability to ask for a public meeting that the division would, if you request a public meeting, then we would, actually come to the location where the proposed well or surface facility would be. We would have to give a 30-day notice, and we would have a meeting to hear more concerns about the well or the waste facility. This would be an opportunity for citizens and elected officials to provide additional feedback on the applications, as well as, if there's any sort of technical deficiency that may be brought up due to the fact that your local, the environment that these wells are going to be, and waste facilities are going to be placed in. So we would have that public meeting. This would be to provide additional feedback. And then after the public meeting, we would have 60 days to answer any sort of questions that were arise during that public meeting. And there would be a determination. So we would either ask the applicant to fix those deficiencies, either deny the permit application, or issue the permit. So this provides additional feedback. It does not, give a vote, so to speak, but it does provide you the ability to provide direct notification to us, to the division, of concerns that the public or you may have on a given application that we have. We'll be more than willing to answer any questions of anything that I discussed here. I believe the next, if Mark is here, he can take over.
Okay, thank you, Kenny.
Welcome.
And Mark, yeah, do you have screen sharing capabilities?
I don't know if I do, but my stuff's with Kenny. So Kenny, if you can just
Oh.
click for me, that'd be great. Thank you,
will.
sir.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I was late. I'm Mark Bruce, an administrative officer with the division, and going to continue to talk a little bit about the public notice process and then get into orphan wells a little bit more detailed for you here. So just something to add on what Kenny kind of talked about there with public notice. When we went through our rulemaking process here at the division, we reached out to a lot of local leaders, elected officials on the local level as well as the state level about ways to make sure that the local perspective was heard, that the local voice was heard. As I'll get into it here a little bit, revised code doesn't allow for local control, so to speak, but it does allow for a voice, and we wanted to make sure we had that. And so that was what we were trying to get to in changes to our public notice process. So what Kenny was talking about was dealing with oil and gas waste facilities, as well as class 2 disposal wells and other types of operations that tend to deal with waste. The vast majority of activity from the oil and gas industry are well permits. So oil and gas wells, production wells, if you want to call them that, and permits. Revised code is pretty clear, and one of the more clear places that it is, that the division has sole and exclusive authority to regulate the oil and gas industry. And so the siting and permitting of an oil and gas well rests solely with the Division of Oil and Gas. So unlike class 2 wells, there's no ability to have a public notice process for those local authorities and local governments regarding production wells. However, the law does allow for kind of notification of when we get applications. So the law requires us to notify county engineers when an application is submitted, and we do that. We have an actual notification system that we use, and then it's also regularly available online on our website. Township trustees can request to receive notifications of applications, and more than 300 trustees across the state have done so. So I think there's 800 townships, so not quite, about maybe a little bit less than a third maybe or so. So which is good. We want to let folks know we want to make information available to folks as they know it, as it's appropriate. But it's our regulatory framework really allows for notification when it comes to oil and gas activity. It's not a part of the decision-making process is probably a good way to say it. So we can answer any more questions about public notice at the end, but kind of just want to give an overview of where that is. Ken, if you want to move forward. So what I want to spend a little bit more time on is our orphan well program and the growth in that program and what this means for locals. And we think this can be a really positive thing. Step forward, Kenny. So more than 300,000 oil and gas wells have been drilled in Ohio since after the Civil War. In the late 1890s, Ohio was the world's leader in oil production, mostly in Northwest Ohio, Lima, Findlay, down to Grand Lake, St. Mary's, kind of what's called the Trenton Field in Northwest Ohio, and we were it. This was the place that oil production really took off in the world. It was in the late 1890s. 1896 was when Ohio produced 25 million barrels of oil, which was the record for a very, very long time until just the last 5 or 6 years. And so there have been different fields that have really kind of been developed over time. But the Division of Oil and Gas didn't come about until 1965. So you've got 100 years of oil and gas development with no regulatory framework. And so those are most of what we find are orphan wells, those old wells that have no owner, that it's the state's responsibility to plug and ultimately address. And that's what we're working to do. And we've got a lot of resources to do so. But I think what's just kind of important to know is that there were a lot of wells that were drilled when there was no regulatory authority looking out over top of it. So I think that it's just something that we'd like to let folks know about. Go forward if you would, Kenny. So the opportunity that we have in front of us, we've got 1,000 wells that are in the orphan well program. That means they've gone through all the statutory requirements to be identified as an orphan well. We've got about 20,000 that we've identified through records that we can call documented orphan wells. So we need to do a little bit more investigation on these to get them appropriately into the program. But we believe that they will qualify as orphan wells. As we said, there's likely more. But these are the hardest numbers that we have: 1,000 orphan wells that meet the statutory definition, about 20,000 that we're going to continue to work on. This map gives you an idea of those documented orphan wells, which are in almost every county. We couldn't find, we didn't have any in Fayette, Clinton, or Brown, but I think we've got them in almost every other county pretty much in the state of Ohio. Click forward, Kenny. Thank you, sir. So this is the growth of our program. Since 2013, you can see we've grown exponentially. Put 200 wells out for bid in 2021. I believe that was fiscal year 2021. Our goal is just to keep growing this even more. But we've plugged more wells in the last few years combined than we did in the whole 25, 30-year history of the orphan well program before then. A lot of that has to do with funding, which we can talk about a little bit, but also just the general growth of the work that we're doing to plug more. Step forward. So just go ahead and advance kind of through these on here. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the federal infrastructure bill, made almost $5 billion available for orphan well plugging, which of about 4.2 is available to states. Hit advance one more time, Kenny. And so the money that's available to Ohio from the feds, a $25 million award, which is initial grant, which was awarded. I don't know if we quite have the money in hand yet, but I know that that has been awarded. And we've got probably another, we estimate another 230 million could be available, and then another 70 on top of that. So bottom line, there's a lot of money available from the federal government to plug orphan wells. And this is already on top of the money that the state of Ohio has available through the revised code here. Advance, if you would, Kenny. So we're one of the most well-funded orphan well programs in the state. We already get about $22 million a year in funding for the orphan well program. That's the revised code requires 30% of the severance tax that's collected on oil and gas to be set aside for orphan well plugging. So about 22 million comes from state dollars every year through the severance tax. As we said, about 326 million could be available through the federal government through the Infrastructure Act. So we're talking about upwards of $630 million could be available for orphan well plugging by 2035. So we have the potential to be one of the top 2 funded states in the country, us and Texas. That's because of our robust state funding and the federal funding that's available. So there's a lot of opportunity to plug a lot of wells, and we have the money to do so. And so what we're doing is growing our program to be able to utilize that money to go out and plug these wells. Advance, if you would, please, sir. So we've kind of got 3 steps to move forward. 1 is to locate, investigate wells. 2 is to design the plugging plans to plug those wells. And then 3 is actually award the contracts to plug the wells. So the division does not plug wells. That's not what we're here to do. Contractors are the ones who actually go out and plug these orphan wells. And so we're trying to come up with as many ways as possible to get folks to do that. And so I can kind of walk through our steps a little bit. One more, Kenny. And so our hope is that we've got a lot of paths for a lot of businesses and contractors and people to get involved in this orphan well process. And from start to finish, from the green all the way down through, the goal is just to get as many wells plugged as possible, using as much money as possible, as quickly as we can. We can't say, how many we can have goals, but we can't say, we don't know how many we'll be able to plug in a year, because it's difficult to plug orphan wells. Number one, it's difficult to find contractors and workers, as a lot of people know, and these contracting companies are the same way. So we're just consistent in saying that our goal is to plug as many wells as possible, using as much money as possible, as quickly as we can. So this is kind of our flow chart to how we do it: locate and find those wells, get them into a project, design how you're going to plug them, and then ultimately go through and plug them. Advance, please. So, and I'll try to go through this quickly. But this is of interest, and I think this is something that we really appreciate, being able to talk to folks that live in our community, so that they can let folks know, they can tell them that, hey, these resources are out there if someone were to have a question. So the first thing, which we're doing more of, is locating wells through drone surveying. So you can see an image there. We attach a magnetometer, that's the yellow thing that's on the bottom of that drone, and we'll fly it to try and identify wells that are buried. And so this is to help us locate unknown wells and increase our package sizes. So increase the efficiency of finding wells. So if we find more wells, we can put those into packages that can bid out and offer up to contractors. So we work with ODOT, the UAS Center, to fly. And then we've also hired some contractors to go out and fly more wells across the state too. So if you'll advance, Kenny, so that drone can fly over a field or a lake, and this is the image that you get back. and it shows us where those wells might be under the ground. So especially in Northwest Ohio, that Lima Trenton field in the 1890s, wells were drilled. They were drilled pretty shallow. And then they were just, the casing was cut off at the surface and buried over top of, and people have farmed over it for 100 years, but there might still be a well there, and it could impact someone's water someday. It might not. It likely isn't having anything, but it could. And so we know there are wells there. We've got some records. So this tool allows us to fly, especially in the spring and summer, when there might be crops over the field, to see what we can find. And then once, in the wintertime and early spring, fall, after harvest, we can actually get out and do some work and try to plug some wells. So that top left there image is just a great example. Those red dots were metal signatures. And so we went back and we were right. The data was correct, that there were wells in those locations. So we put together a package to actually go out and plug those wells. So this is a great tool that's helping us increase those number of wells that we can find, and then also get a much better idea. Okay, this is actually where a well is. So we can go in, pinpoint the location of that, and then get a contractor out there, put it out for bid, and then ultimately get a contractor out there to plug it. So this is a great tool, and a way that Ohio is being a leader to, use technology to help us find where these wells are and ultimately get them plugged. Next. So after we find those wells, and it's through plugging plans, but it's also through folks saying, yeah, my grandfather told me about a well that used to be in this woods for 50 years ago, 80 years ago. And so I think there's something out here. We take those too. So we just did a public information campaign. Hopefully you saw some ads and saw some TV ads and heard some radio ads about how we telling folks, hey, if you think you know something, give us a call. If you've heard a story, or you see a pipe out of the ground, or you see some old equipment, the division wants to know about it. And so we're getting an increase of, yeah, I think I know where a well is, so that we can go out as we send a staff member out to try and identify, yep, there's something here. And so now the next step is actually figuring out how you're going to plug those wells. And so it's called a plugging plan. And so you have to try to find as much data about the well. How deep is it? Do we know? Sometimes we know a lot, sometimes we don't. And so it's going out and trying to get as much information as you can to develop this plan to say how you're going to plug this well, while also building in some contingencies for what might you find down in that well when it comes time to plug it. Historically, the division staff has written these plans. We've increased our staff so that we can write more of them, but we've also hired additional contractors to design these plans for us. So now we have division staff developing these plans and additional contractors that are out devising and designing these plans as well. And that's good. That this allows us to identify, get those wells and get the plans designed so we can get more of them plugged ultimately. It's specific work, but it has to be, because we are plugging these wells for eternity. Probably a little bit much, but we're plugging these wells for the long term to ensure, that there's no impact on public health, safety, the environment. So we got to do it right when we design it and ultimately do it. Next, please. And so after we design the plugging plans, then it's time to actually plug the wells. And so there's a couple ways that we can do that. As I said, the state doesn't plug the wells. We award contracts to companies that do that. So we have a contract through the Department of Administrative Services. And how that works is there's a list of contractors that is available. It's on our website. And these companies can bid on the bids that we put out there. So as I said, we'll design those scope of works, put them together into packages. It might be as little as 1 well or 5 to 10. We put a couple 20, 30 well packages out there for bid. And then companies will bid, this is how much we think it would take to plug these wells. And the lowest bidder is awarded that bid and goes out and does the work. And so that's called the traditional program. That's how a lot of the wells in our program have been plugged, through these pre-approved contractors bidding on these contracts to go out and plug them. Advance if you would, Kenny. And then we've tried to come up with other ways and grow other ways as well for people to do that. Something we've just started is called Construction Managers at Risk. And we've got 2 contractors here who are doing this, utilizing that $25 million from the federal government. And basically this construction manager at risk will serve as the general contractor. And so they'll design the design plans. The state will still identify the wells and say that these are orphan wells. And then they'll come out and they'll design they will put together the work to design these plans, and then they will execute plugging them. Now, the division will still inspect and do all the appropriate things that we have to do, but these construction managers can hire subcontractors and break the work down as necessary in order to get these wells plugged. So we just viewed this as another avenue to get more companies and more people involved in the plugging process to plug more wells. Move forward if you would, Kenny. And then that's a little bit more about construction manager at risk, what the construction manager can do with the subcontractors, the bidding, but it's all still regulated by us. One more, Kenny. And then we also have the landowner pass-through program here. Our first well was plugged in January 22. I think I saw there were another handful that were added. We've got 20 some that we're reviewing right now. So basically how this is, and a contractor does not have to be part of our program through the construction manager at risk or the pre-approved contract. A landowner can work directly with a contractor to get a well plugged. So if there's a great example is, and I talked to someone at the state fair with this example today. This landowner lived in Shelby County, and there was just kind of a wildcat well on their property. That is, it's in our program. It's designated as an orphan well. There aren't many near it. There aren't many others nearby. It's not actively leaking, but this landowner just like, I really would just like to take care of it. I think ultimately they wanted to build a structure nearby or something, a barn or something, I believe. And so this landowner pass-through program is a great opportunity for that landowner to work with someone to get his well plugged that the state will still pay for. So basically how it works is a landowner just has to work with a contractor who's regularly engaged in the business of plugging wells, and they seek out that contractor, and that contractor can put together a bid proposal for how to get that well plugged. And we review that as the state to ensure that it meets all of our requirements, that they've done the appropriate design work, and et cetera. And if it meets all the requirements, goes through everything that needs to go through, we can award that well to be plugged through the landowner pass-through. And the landowner's not out any money, the contractor's getting paid for their work, and it's coming from the orphan well fund. And we're plugging another orphan well. So it's really a win-win for everyone. This is something that I would encourage all of you folks to just kind of keep in mind there. You know, if you hear a constituent or you hear someone that in your community that, yeah, I've got this well, it is an orphan well. You know, the big thing I should add is that the orphan well has to be accepted into the program. So we have to do that initial work to ensure that, yes, this is an orphan well. No one has the rights to this well. But once it is, this is an option that can get the well plugged and get it paid for through the orphan well program. So we really think there's a lot of growth in this. There's a lot of opportunity, and just encourage folks to kind of keep this option out there. And there's lots of information on our website about it. If you would move forward, Kenny. So anyone can report a suspected orphan well at oilandgas.ohiodnr.gov. There's a link right there on the homepage where they can fill out a couple questions, report that well to us, and we'll go out and investigate it. It might be an orphan well. It might not. It might be a production well that just needs some attention from the operator that is currently on record. It truly might be an orphan well that then we can start to investigate and get into the program. But we've committed the resources, we've committed the staff to this program, and to grow the orphan well program and plug more wells. And so we really just want to tell folks about it and make sure they know the resources that we have available, what we can do in the immediate term, and then also what might happen at the end of the day with the plugging of the well and the ways that it can get done. Just one kind of, and go ahead and advance if you would, Kenny. One final thought that was the end. I thought it was just to keep in mind, especially when it comes to orphan wells, is sometimes there can be a fine line between what truly is an orphan well, and a well that maybe, just to put it mildly, needs some work from the oil and gas operator. They've neglected it or things of that nature. In Ohio, the law is very clear that if there is an owner of the well, that person is responsible for that well. So a well that is owned by a company who might not be the best actor cannot just come into the orphan well program to get plugged. There's enforcement action that the division can take against that owner to bring that well into compliance, or ultimately force the owner to plug it. But just because a well needs work or might need to be plugged doesn't mean it can go into the orphan well program. An owner is an owner of a well and is responsible for their well. So that's just an important distinction to keep in mind here. We have a robust enforcement structure, so we can take action against companies that might not be taking care of a well as much as they need to, and we can do that, and we are doing that. And for the most part, companies do a good job of keeping their wells in production or working toward plugging them. But just because a well isn't in the best of shape doesn't automatically make it an orphan well. For it to be an orphan well, there truly has to be no responsible party out there. And there's a little bit of title work and such that the division has to do to get there. But once we get a well into the orphan well program, there are a lot of things that we can do and a lot of resources that are out there to ensure that we get them plugged. So that's kind of my spiel. I know we've got some questions there already. So I think Tara, Kenny, and I are all here. We can try to answer those. Mike McCormick from our division is here as well. Mike is part of our permitting section, and I know he speaks to a lot of groups, speaks to this group a lot. So we've got quite a crew here that can help answer any questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you all for your wonderful updates and presentations. So I'm just gonna go ahead and look at the chat here, and we have a few questions already. One of the questions coming from Tom Winston here is, what constitutes a waste facility? Would that include a single waste disposal well?
So when he says waste disposal well, I assume he's a class 2 disposal well for brine. So each of those, and this is more Kenny's program, but each of those has a surface facility. So in the rules, we've designated if a surface facility for a class 2 disposal well stores over 12,000 barrels, then it will become a waste facility and falls within the waste facility rules. Kenny, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so it's also the solely connected to the class 2 disposal well itself. So everybody, or every well itself is going to have some sort of storage, secondary containment that they'll need, and they'll have an offloading either via pipeline or a truck ability to offload. So there is, but every well will have a surface facility.
I'll just add one thing too. When we wrote these rules and updated them, we wrote them together because there is some overlap, so that a lot of standards that apply to one apply to the others. They're not identical, and there are things that apply to an oil and gas waste facility that might not apply to a class 2 disposal well, but there are a lot of things that are similar. And so when we updated and strengthened our rules, we worked to get those things that are important for all across the waste spectrum to apply to everything across the waste spectrum. So while there is a difference between the two, there's a lot of our regulatory framework is very similar in regards to both two. So just adding that.
Okay, Gwen, do you want to ask your question? I think you're next on the list there.
Sure. I just wondered if there was guidance on if a community or a township or county wanted to deter oil and gas waste facility, what type of zoning or land use regulations would they need?
Oh, that's a good question.
I
So
can take a stab first if you want, Tara. So
sure, go ahead, Mark.
I think I'll kind of point back to 150902 that I mentioned that applied to permitting as it was, but it applies to our whole regulatory framework in that, you know, the division has sole and exclusive authority when it comes to oil and gas. So zoning, you know, whether or not an area is zoned residential or industrial, et cetera, isn't a factor. I mean, the General Assembly has just stated that it's not a factor when it comes to the siting of a waste facility or an oil and gas well, whatever it might be. However, when we wrote our rules for waste facilities and we wrote our rules for class 2 disposal wells, you know, as they mentioned, we added in setbacks. We tried to add in those items that are important from a public health and safety standpoint when considering the location of these types of facilities. So when it comes to zoning, I just want to be abundantly clear that the local zoning does not have an impact for any oil and gas activity. Tara, anything to add?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. We have those setbacks to help address some of those issues. So particularly where they're wanting to locate waste facilities in more of a municipal type area. So
we did, however, I'll call a spade. For the oil and gas waste facility, there is a section that if it's zoned industrial, some of the setbacks and thing that might apply don't. So the idea that if there is an industrial zone, that's an appropriate location for a facility that might have truck traffic, things like that, you know, because the local community has has determined that this is an industrial zone. These are the types of things that can go here. So that was in talking with some local folks, and that was part of our rulemaking process that we did. That was some feedback we got, and we like that idea, that if a local community says this is an industrial zone, and if a operator were to choose that this is where they propose to locate their facility, okay, well, that makes sense. The community says so, the operator recognizes that maybe some of the other, setbacks we have don't need to apply as much to encourage companies to locate in places like that. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. Dale Arnold, I'm going to turn it over to you just for a second here. He has some clarifying points to make.
Yeah, building, guys, first of all, I would really thank you for being with us today. I was involved in the local comment process here earlier in the year on these particular rules. I really appreciate the work you've done, because we've gone and, a lot of the rules that we had at that time applied to 20th century technology. And we're now in the middle of 21st century technology, and these updates and different things really reflect what we're seeing in the industry. Also, building on what Gwen's question and Mark, your comment and different things, and I can stand to be corrected, but if you take a look at the injection well program, it's the United States Environmental Protection Agency program for Class 2 injection wells for brine. A lot of people always ask me, going, why can't we borrow from folks from other states coming in to use these facilities? And you need to know that the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution and interstate commerce applies with regard to that. There are times when zoning could and could not with regard to that. If you could you explain, I know there's a memorandum of understanding between US EPA on Class 2 injection wells and with ODNR administering programs and things. Can you briefly explain that relationship and what you're doing as part of that particular process? Thank you.
Go for it, Kenny.
So Dale's question. So this is in 1983. Well, prior to that, 1983, we were awarded what's determined as primacy or primary regulatory authority over Class 2 and Class 3 wells within the state of Ohio. It also incorporates Ohio EPA involved with their Class 1 and Class 5 wells, and the classes are just set up for the differences in what type of waste stream that they're going to be dealing with. So we have, so through the primacy agreement, there was, an MOU between the state and Region 5, which is in Chicago for US EPA. And so the administrator and the state came up with an agreement. And part of that is that we have to provide, they have ultimate, oversight over our program. However, we are the primary regulatory agency over these wells, and they have determined that our process through permitting, operating, construction, plugging of these wells, that we meet the requirements that any state or a direct implementation. So if EPA was regulating our program, we would meet those requirements. So we have this agreement that we have to supply them with information regarding our wells, including, permitting, how many wells were permitted in a year, plugged in a year, going through inspections. There's a whole gamut of it. There's a matrix that I have to fill out and compile this information and provide it to EPA twice a year on all of our wells that we regulate. They have the authority to come into and review our records, and they did that for reporting year 2013. The final report, I think, was issued in late 2015, early 2016. So they have the authority to come in, review our program, and make recommendations. There is the authority that if we were not meeting the agreement, that yeah, they could potentially, through major violations, could take the program over. But through regular talks with US EPA, they also have the requirement to review our rules. So like what Mark was saying, like we incorporated them from the beginning of drafts, just communicating with them as to what type of rules we're going to change. These are kind of the thought process that we're going to be changing in our rule. And then they ultimately provided feedback and comments. There is a requirement to have the federal US EPA adopt our rules in their statutes. That has not happened yet due to we're changing. We're going to be in the process of changing other rules, and we're going to incorporate all those changes at that given time. As well as we have another program that the General Assembly has requested us to begin primacy talks with US EPA with class 6, which is carbon sequestration. Or so we're in those starting talks with that. So US EPA has authority over our program. We provide information to them. Ultimately, if a state were to not keep up with that agreement, then primacy authority could be taken away from them. But that has not ever been thought of in this state.
Well, thank you very much for that answering things, Kenny and Mark and Tara. I just wanted to bring that up because people have always asked me, is there collaboration here? Is the federal government involved? Is the state government involved? Do you have opportunities for local government to be involved? And it's interesting how these rules and the memorandums of understanding all blend, and helping our local governments understand their part of the process and how they can collaborate is always important. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, yeah, thank you all. We got some more questions here. We're going to keep on moving. Tom Winston had a second question. Could one of you talk about the role of local floodplain managers?
Tara, yeah, what you want you go, Tara?
Sure. So so when the particularly with the waste facility, when the floodplain could possibly be impacted, we work with the local state floodplain coordinator. And then at times we do obtain the local floodplain ordinances also and take a look at that and make sure that they meet all the requirements of the floodplain locally and at the state level. So depending on how we obtain that information, I have had to have conversations with local floodplain managers in the past. So there is some communication that does go on with them.
Okay. All right, moving on here. Fred Michael had a question. Does the drone magnetometer measure methane or pipes in the ground?
Mark, you want me to take
yeah.
this one? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so so the magnetometers do not measure methane. They're actually just picking up the magnetic field coming off of the well casing. So if there is steel pipe in the ground, it will pick that up. Railroad tracks, it picks those up, and actually will send out and cover up our anomalies for wells if they're along a railroad track. So that's more of what the drone magnetometers do. So as we're getting into looking at more on the federal side, using the federal money for the first grant, the initial grant, we are not required to do methane emission testing. That'll kick in for the formula grants. But we are starting to look at how we're possibly going to measure the methane. So it gives us a chance to kind of come up with a program to do that. Whether we're going to try to do that in-house or utilize consultants to assist us with that. So at this point, on the question on, what are the wells prioritized based on methane emission rate? Not on methane emission and the rate per se, but we do take a look at when we're going and determining if an orphan well is orphan ready. We're looking at, is there gas being emitted from the well? So we do look at that, and that goes into its ranking and the score that it gets, and then that falls into where it's prioritized. So we do take that into consideration.
Okay, that was all the questions I had on the chat box. Again, Kenny, Tara, Mark, thank you so much for your updates. Very informative. I'm going to open it up. Anyone else have any questions for ODNR? Or anyone from any questions about solar that could potentially be answered today? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing anything else come up here. But again, the recordings will be available as soon as we get them formatted correctly. And what I'm going to do is I'd like to send them out to everyone that registered for the program in case they had something going on, they had to miss it. But again, thank you, presenters. Thank you all that attended today. And I hope it was informative. And again, we will be making the recordings available in case you know someone that missed it that might also get a lot out of this. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.